Morning. It's good to see you all this morning. If we haven't met before, my name is Colin. I'm the pastor here at Branches, and it's just a joy to be with you in worship as we continue in our vision series. You saw in the bumper video there that we're kind of looking back on all the things we're excited about from the things that have happened at Branches, the way God has been at work in our lives through this new community. We're so excited to celebrate our birthday next weekend, our second birthday. Yeah, we're stoked about it and just amazed at all the cool things that have happened in the life of our community. So next week we'll have cake and just a celebration together to thank God for everything he's done at Branches. And then part of that too is looking back on what God has done in the past. We can kind of maybe set some at least mild expectations for what God might do through our community in the future. And so every year around September, around our birthday, we have a 3-week series we call our Vision Series, where we revisit our core values, like what undergirds what we do as a community. And those 3 values are belonging, daring, and abiding. And belonging, we talked about last week. We want to begin and end with belonging, that all people, no matter what they believe or don't believe, who they are, where they've come from, can find their home here at Branches, can find a place where they can grow in their spiritual life. They can make some community, connect with others, and just find a soft landing for them, especially if you're moving to a new city. If you come to Houston, like Landon and I did a few years ago, you want to find a place where you can belong. And so we want to do that together and make sure everybody finds a place they can belong here. And then today we're talking about daring, this second core value of what it means to be a daring people. So I'm glad that you're here as we continue in this vision series and talk about where we're headed, where we want to go, and where we think God might want us to go. So if it's your first time here, or just one of your first times here, we'd love if you would check in. Let us know that you're here today so we can get your contact information, put you on the email list, let you know all the things that are coming up in the life of our community, groups, classes, ways to grow in your spiritual life, places to connect and have some fun, to meet some other people in the Branches community. So if you'll check in today and just let us know you're here, we'd love to connect with you. And also, if it's your first time here, I'd love to meet you personally in the lobby after worship today. So like I said, we're in our vision series and we're talking about daring today. And if you've been here for a while, you know, kind of weaving in and out of my sermons and things that I talk about and things that I write is someone who I wish I could call a close friend, Brene Brown. And she has this quote. It's not hers, but that she uses, that she used for the kind of platform for her book, Daring Greatly. So if you're not a fan of Brene Brown, maybe you're a fan of Teddy Roosevelt, one of our presidents, who said this. And so I'm going to read this quote for us today. There he is. Just look at him. Talk about vision, just like the type of person I aspire to be. There he is. All right. This is what Teddy Roosevelt said. He said this in 1910, and he was in Paris, France. He said, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error or shortcoming. But who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who knew neither victory nor defeat." To dare greatly. That's the spirit of Brene Brown's book. And really, when we were talking about the sort of community we wanted to be, when we were meeting with leadership, and Carrie and I were talking, and Michelle and I were talking, and we were just kind of having conversations about what we wanted this place to be, we kept talking about a place that didn't do church as usual, that didn't settle, that wanted to step out and do the hard thing, have hard conversations, step out and stand up for things that were right, and to care for people, and to in an environment where people are lonely and isolated and people are literally hungry and longing for a community. It takes risk. It takes that great enthusiasm. It takes that great effort that Teddy Roosevelt describes. It takes daring. So we're while we begin and end with belonging, we also want to be a place that's daring. And so I've been thinking about this week and kind of listened to my last 2 sermons on this, and was just thinking about people in my life who I think are daring. And a lot of people came to mind, but it was interesting to me to find that not just religious leaders, and they have, and not just kind of thought leaders like Brene Brown, because they have, but kind of popular culture figures have kind of latched on to this quote and little pieces of it from Teddy Roosevelt. Miley Cyrus, And if there's any fans in the room, she has it tattooed, Dare Greatly, on her arm. She's just being Miley, Dare Greatly. Did somebody say stop? No, I will not. I'm going to dare greatly. She's just being Miley. Okay, second, if Miley's not your thing, LeBron James has this whole thing like man in the arena, so he's kind of given himself to this. Cadillac had a ad campaign about daring greatly, like dare greatly and finance one of our cars, I guess was the kind of spirit behind that. But I mean, it taps into something human. Like when you read the quote from Teddy Roosevelt, I mean, there's something in you that's like, yeah. Like we just got done watching the Olympics and the Paralympics are happening now. Like this enthusiasm, this effort, this high achievement, just like the indomitable human spirit, just like lifting up people around them just by witnessing someone's great achievement. And there's something inside of us that wants that. There's something inside of us that sometimes feels a little bit of like, I need to do something. I need to dare greatly. I need to step out. Who in your life embodies this daring spirit that so many people echo and long for and search for, and that we're trying to be as a community? I read this week in The Atlantic a story about, what was the title exactly? It was really good. It's by Tyler Austin Harper, and the title was Inside the Dangerous Secretive World of Extreme Fishing, which on its face was not something I'd be like, let's go, like I'm ready to read this. But the photography in the article was really beautiful. The story was just really captivating, and it's about wetsuiting, this very specific type of fishing. And it happens in Maine and Massachusetts and Connecticut. And here in this story, it's in Montauk, like New York. And these fishermen, they don't go out in a boat. They don't stand on the shore. They wear a wetsuit like a surfer would, and they swim out to the rocks and the reefs, and they cast in the middle of the roaring waves. And there's a lot of danger there. Like they could be swept away into the water and lost, and some have. And they could be crashed into the rocks and the waves, and some of them have. And they could actually, even though the populations are kind of dwindling, they could be bitten by sharks and killed by a shark. All for the pursuit of these striped bass. They're these sea bass that they're trying to catch, and often without any success at all, but for hours at a time, often in the nighttime, casting and looking for these fish. The story that I read kind of follows this one wetsuit fisherman. His name is Brandon Sassell. And Brandon has a job and a family, but he will go out at sunset, and then as the sun starts to rise again, he leaves the ocean, not to go home and sleep, but then goes to his day job. So he's like this sleep-deprived, insane man who just wants to catch these fish. And it's him and dozens of others in this town that's kind of, dwindled in fishermen because it's kind of upscale now. And it's like these homes that are empty 50 weeks of the year. And then 2 weeks, it's kind of this vacation destination. And then here he is in his wetsuit swimming out to sea to catch these fish. And I'm reading the story, I'm like, I would never do this. This sounds so dumb. I have no interest. But I'm captivated by it because it was illustrating for me this daring spirit, the risk it takes for this just draw to catch these fish. And even in the midst of just mostly failure, just for the taste of some catch. And it's insane. They don't cook these fish or anything. They catch them and then release them. And they do all of this just to catch the fish. I was really captivated by this one quote from the writer, Tyler Austin Harper. This is great. He says, if this sounds insane, that's because it is. Wetsuiters are all mad, and they always have been, spending sleepless night after sleepless night up to your chest in the riotous Atlantic. Hunting fish the size of a preschooler isn't a hobby that people who are psychologically grounded pursue. I do not exempt myself from this charge. Many disciples speak about their relationship with the sport as a kind of addiction. More than a few have lost marriages and jobs in their desperate quest for this fish. Some have lost their life. If this sounds insane, that's because it is. It's daring, it's crazy, it's insane. And when I read the New Testament, and particularly in the Gospels, I see this same sort of attitude directed at Jesus and his disciples. Like it's even said, this man is mad. His family thinks he's mad. The disciples are charged with being this kind of crazy religious sect. And something that speaks deeply to my heart, Jesus owns it. And we are kind of in a long line of followers of Jesus who the best of us are charged with being insane. Ronald Rolheiser calls it being insane for the light. And that's embracing it in a different way. Say, like, yeah, it is kind of crazy, and it's me, it's for me. And so we're reading in John 10 today, Jesus and his risk, Jesus and his daring greatly to share who he is and about himself, and that's now been handed on to us. And so we're in John 10, starting in verse 31, it says this: "The Jews took up stones again to stone him. And Jesus replied, 'I have shown you many good works from the Father. For which of these are you going to stone me?' Jews answered, 'It is not for a good work that we are going to stone you, but for blasphemy. Because you, though only a human being, are making yourself God.' Jesus answered, 'Is it not written in your law, I said you are gods? If those to whom the word of God came were called gods, and the scripture cannot be annulled, can you say that the one whom the Father has sanctified and sent into the world is blaspheming because I said I am God's son? If I'm not doing the works of my Father, then do not believe me. But if I do them, even though you do not believe me, believe the works, so that you may know and understand that the Father is in me and I am in the Father.' Then they tried to arrest him again, and he escaped from their hands." Friends, this is the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. Thanks be to God for this example of daring, and for us, if you follow Jesus, the central example that, like, when we read Jesus' story, we don't read of a Jesus like, sorry that I said this about myself. Is there another way I could have said it that would have been more appropriate for you, That Jesus says, no, you see the works that I've done, and they come from the Father, and this is like an identifier for me. Like, this is who I am. I can't say anything about myself because this is who I am, and that's what Christians have believed for centuries. And Jesus, in saying this, in making this claim that I am God's son, this lofty claim of self-identity, that if he's telling a lie, it's out of pride or out of kind of some derangement or something. But for Christians, they want to say, like, no, he was right about himself. And he faced violence. We see here the threat of violence, to be stoned, to be publicly executed, judgment and exclusion from a community that he was actually trying to lift up and draw to himself, and suspicion. Jesus dares greatly because he has this confidence of who he actually is, and not just who he is, not just that's the only thing, but what it can offer the world. That if you believe that my works are from the Father and I'm in the Father and the Father is in me, it transforms everything. Because what Jesus embodies is not a power over sort of identity in God, but that of the unlimited power that he had, that Christians want to claim, of the unlimited knowledge and resource that he had, that Christians want to claim, of all of the things that Jesus possesses that he describes here, he could have used to dominate, to manipulate, to overbear, to oversee. But instead, he took on the form of a servant, and he walked among us, and he gave of himself. It was outward oriented. It was for the good of the other. It was not for his own good, but for the good of the world, John says in John 3:16 famously. It wasn't for his own good, for his own self-propagation, but in giving of himself, then he is lifted up and we see him for who he really is. And to claim that before he's crucified, and then eventually, again, as Christians want to claim, resurrected, before that, it's just an insane claim. You can almost hear the same echo. If this sounds insane, that's because it is. And Christians have had to grapple with that and wrestle with that for centuries to say, we dare not only to believe that Jesus is who he said he is, but that somehow does something to us and our conduct and how we live in the world. That Christians for centuries have said, our resources and our time and our energy and our attention does not go to the powerful and to the important and to the successful, but to the poor and the marginalized and the other. As we talked about last week, that Jesus' mission was to turn every them into an us. And to do that, we have to give of ourselves to people who cannot and would not return the favor, but because God sees them and calls them child. There's risk in that. And we don't face violence. We may face some suspicion, and maybe you've been in that position. And we don't face imprisonment as some Christians do in other parts of the world, but we may face eye rolling or disagreement or contention. But it is a risk. It is a dare to say, I believe who this person says he is, and it changes how I live in the world. Imagine for a second, even if you don't believe this, especially if you don't believe this, imagine Jesus is who he says he is, and what that means for how you should conduct yourself, and what that means in the world that we live in, and how that could be a risk, how that could mean that just by fact you have to dare greatly to even exist because you believe that. Because you believe the God of the universe stepped down into history and took on this form and gave himself and did not take for himself. What does it mean to be daring for us then? There's a quote in the story about the wetsuiting fishermen. They say, boat fish don't count. So if the waves are too wild and you chicken out and you get in your boat instead of swimming out to the rocks and you catch a fish, that one doesn't count. Boat fish don't count. There's a kind of pernicious, unhelpful spirit, I think, in the church sometimes about like, well, this is good enough for church. I mean, I wouldn't present this in my own home or own business, but it's church, so like we can kind of let it slide. So like let the standard of excellence kind of fall. Or we let the standard of like kind of standing by what we teach or believe fall by the wayside. Yeah, those don't count. When we sell Jesus short, that doesn't count. For us to be daring is to like hold fast to the central mission and message of Jesus. Otherwise, it doesn't count. That's daring for me to say maybe, but I think important. It's also daring for us to be other-oriented. We, again, live in a culture where like it actually, you get a lot more attention if you kind of are self-serving and you want to prop yourself up and you want to have your own platform. You want to be successful. You want to be seen. You want to leave a legacy. You want to be important and be seen as important. And the one person who actually deserved that forsook all that, forsook, it sounds like King James, gave all that away so that all people could be drawn to him. It also is daring to say that there's something bigger and other than yourself. Again, it's popular, or at least common, or maybe so common that we don't even notice it, that it's important for you to like go your own way and kind of commit yourself to your own opinion, your own idea, or your own journey, your own kind of path that you've charted for yourself. And it's daring, again, if we follow Jesus, to say there's actually something bigger and other than myself that's worth giving myself to, even if it means giving up everything that I want for myself. When we read this quote from Teddy Roosevelt, in the way that Miley and LeBron and Cadillac or Brene even, or any other person, Colin, somebody else you've heard quote this before, we Americanize it deeply. Modern Americanize it. We say like, this is about me. And I mean, of course, here Teddy Roosevelt says the man. So then it's like, no woman could do this, you know, kind of have this like gender exclusive language here. Oh, yeah. Michelle, this is classic Michelle, you know. So we can replace that with a human person, you know. I don't think Teddy Roosevelt meant it to be exclusionary, but that's, you know, that's how they talked back then. But again, we individualize it. Like, think of what I could do if I dared greatly. Think of what I could do if I just worked really hard myself. Think of what I could do as this very important American individual. Like, individualism is important. Self-sufficiency is important. I go it alone. I'm so great. Amazing. You can see and hear that I don't agree with that. And actually, if you read the rest of Teddy Roosevelt's speech, you can see that that's not what he was talking about at all. And this is the other part of being daring, and something that I'm trying so hard to learn. And I think that we should do well to learn as a community, and when we share this story and this kind of message of belonging and daring and abiding, as we cast aside our desire for and the kind of ways we've been taught to be really strong, important, successful individuals. If we read the rest of Teddy Roosevelt's speech, it's in a speech entitled, this is really riveting, Citizenship in a Republic. Wow, man, it doesn't ring like daring greatly, you know? But it's about how we dare greatly together. We do better together. We actually kind of don't take in what Teddy Roosevelt is teaching here when we say, like, I'm going to go it alone. The critic he's describing, if you go on to read the rest of the speech, the critic he's describing is one who says, that'll never work. That'll never work if you, he's talking about democracy, bind together and do something better together. We dare greatly when we say, I can't do it alone. We dare greatly when we say, I need you. We need each other. We can't chart our own course individually. I say this all the time. There is no solitary Christian. People say to me all the time, like, I don't go to church. I do kind of my own Christian thing. Is that okay? Like, I'm not mad about it. Like, that's great. That's awesome. But if you continue to follow Jesus, you're going to eventually have this kind of urge or kind of burden to say, like, I can't do this alone. I got to find a community. It's like, I love Jesus, but I don't love the church. There's a big problem there. Jesus loved the church and loves the church and loves the community, and he asked that community of people to dare greatly and rely on one another and to take the risk of not being self-sufficient and an individual. When we read again, let's look at it again and hear that with the lens of what Jesus is calling us to be daring, what Teddy Roosevelt said in that speech. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or woman, or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the person who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error or shortcoming. But who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself on a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of a high achievement, and who at the worst, if they fail, at least they fail while daring greatly, so that their place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who knew neither victory nor defeat. We give ourselves as a community to being people who dare greatly together, who give ourselves to something bigger, who dare to be other-oriented, who dare to love people who are unloved, who dare to go to the margins and lift up people and make a them into an us, who dare to say the good news about who Jesus is and who he could be for all people, not just us. The critic says that won't work. The critic says that doesn't count. The critic says it's not worth it. And we look upon Jesus and we listen to his words and hear him say, it is worth it. Dare greatly. Thanks be to God for that.